So once again, I'm Phil. I'm a full-time spoken word poet. And if you don't know what that means, that's totally okay. A lot of times I say that and people say things like, what is that? Is that even a job? How do you support yourself? And by people, I generally mean my family and friends. And the short answer of what I do, in a nutshell, is I tell stories. And I've been incredibly lucky at a relatively young age to be able to support myself doing it. I co-run an organization with a best friend, a fellow poet, another TED alum, Sarah Kay, no relation. And we get to travel around nationally and internationally performing and teaching spoken word poetry workshops, helping people tell the stories that they want to tell. Now, I said that I tell stories, but it's a bit of a misnomer because all of us tell stories. I have a bit of an advantage, especially in a place like this, where I'm standing up, you're sitting down, I'm in the place that we've all agreed is the stage. Most of the time before I speak, somebody says a lot of really nice things about me that I write. But we're all constantly exchanging our own narratives, right? We do it all the time. We do it on the phone, we do it online, we do it in coffee shops, we do it with people we love, we do it with people we just met for the first time. And I'm really fascinated by this. And a lot of the work I do with Project Voice centers around this question of how do you tell a good story? And there's a lot of very tangible elements, right? Topic, structure, diction. But as I was working with more and more people and hearing hundreds and hundreds of stories, I became obsessed with this different question, this deeper question, which is why we tell stories. Right? For thousands of years, almost every human culture has been telling stories. Right? What moved me to get up in front of a room full of people I'd never met and talk about a period in my life that for many years I just wanted to wish had never happened? And it's not just a historical thing or an artist thing. We all do it. Right? Why do we have a tradition of reading bedtime stories to our children? You know, why do we get online and spill these narratives about ourselves to people we don't know very well or may never well meet? And this is a real question that I really asked myself. And to be totally honest, I couldn't come up with an answer. And I had a big freak-out moment. Here I was, I had this career, and I couldn't answer this simple question of why do I tell stories? Was it all just self-indulgence? You know, when I'm feeling very cynical, and people ask me, what's it like to be a spoken word poet? I'd be like, it's like the opposite of a therapist. A therapist, you pay them money, you sit down, you tell them your problems. Spoken word poet, you pay me money, you sit down, I tell you my problems. Which I didn't believe. And I thought, I was like, do I? And no, I don't believe that. Then what was it? Then what was it? And I struggled. And I went back and forth and I searched and I thought back to my own first experiences. And some of my first experiences with stories were impression. I loved it, right? So I came home after watching Pirates of the Caribbean, and also they told, you know, it's Mom went his breakfast. Which was weird. But the reason I loved impression was because it was an immediate story, right? Just by changing the tone, the pitch, the timbre, all of a sudden I took on this entire context of belief, of feeling. And it was fun, right? I'd go with my sister to fast food places. I'd be like, can I have a number 4? To go, right? And when I thought about why I did that, it was a pretty simple answer. It was to make my little sister laugh. And I thought about, we have a lot of times we tell stories with these very simple intentions: to entertain, to warn, to scare, to explain. And that was getting me somewhere, but not down to the real crux of why we're all telling stories. And I still haven't figured out yet, but after reading a lot of books and talking to thousands of people, my best guess is that we tell stories to feel alive. Bear with me, right? We like to believe that our lives are incredibly predictable. Take me, for example. Yesterday, I woke up in my apartment in New York. I took a bus to the airport, got on a plane, and I'm here. And in retrospect, this seems incredibly linear, incredibly predictable. But right here is all the options of what could have been. I could have taken a different bus, and met the love of my life. Taken a different plane with propeller failure, and the whole plane could have gone down. I could have woken up sick, never been here, never met any of you, any of these relationships that I've had from this day would have never happened. We like to think that we can plot our lives out, but there's this big, deep unknowing out there, this deep chance. And I think maybe subconsciously that makes us feel vulnerable. It's scary. And in the face of that great vulnerability, that's where that impulse to tell stories comes from, to share, to connect, to figure out what it is to feel alive, to stand here and say, I stood here with these people today, and I want to celebrate. As Lieutenant Choi said so aptly, I am somebody. Story lets us carve our initials into the wet cement of this moment. And it does it so well because it not only celebrates vulnerability, but it embodies vulnerability. The act of telling a story is a vulnerable act in and of itself. You know, this TED Talk could suck. I'm not sure it doesn't yet. And that suckiness would ring out on the internet for years. And that's terrifying. But here I am, and here are all these other people who have been so incredibly vulnerable and shared so much of themselves, all here trying to figure out what it means to be alive. In the face of this great unknowing of our future, I think we tell stories to make a context of our past. Think about it this way. You're walking through a city you've never been in before. You're taking in the sights, walking down the avenues, looking in the shop windows, getting the scent of these particular streets. And later you look at a map and you say, okay, all right, so I was here, I walked along here, I saw this, I liked this was not okay. I like to think of life as one big new city. And the people that live it well know exactly what the streets smell like. Stories let us build our own maps. They give us context, right? They become our streets, our landmarks. I know when my grandmother passed away, that is a bell tower of grief in my map. The first time I found poetry, a spring in the center of my map, and life has erupted all around it. So what does all this mean, right? If we tell stories to make sense of this great unknown, what does that mean in terms of telling good stories? I would say it teaches us to embrace the vulnerability, embrace the risk, dare I say, right? To break out of predictability. The best way to tell a good story is to live a good story. Talk to the person next to you on the bus. Maybe they are the love of your life. And the other piece is to not be afraid to be vulnerable enough to tell your story. The biggest question I get anywhere I go, and this is 5-year-olds and 75-year-olds, is how can I start? I love this art form, whether it's poetry, storytelling, nonfiction writing, but how do I start? And there's this underlying question to that of what book do I need to read? What certain life experience do I need to have? What's the right school I need to graduate from to start? And my best, most simple advice is to completely throw that out. That's not what it's about. People haven't been telling stories for thousands of years to all get published in Harper's. Let go of this idea of perfection, because that's not what it's about. It is to connect, I think. It is to make sense of what it is to be human.